It's not just the answers, not just the quotes. It's life in the margins. It's time for Cluffs Notes. So a lot's happened over the last year or so. There's been deaths, relationships that have been shifting, old expectations that are surfacing in new ways, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, I found myself labeling something in my head that I now just refer to as the Patty problem. And I'll let you decide if Patty's a person, a hamburger, a peppermint. That's not really the important part. The important part is this pattern. The Patty problem is what happens when someone's expectations are no longer reasonable, but the people around them often still act as though they are. And once I noticed it, I started seeing it everywhere. Honestly, I think I've seen it my whole life. I just never had language for it. I saw it in family systems where everyone adapted quietly around this emotional expectation of the patriarch or the matriarch, where the whole family learns, okay, this is what we do to keep grandma from getting too upset. I saw it in my religious experiences. In the church culture that I came from, there were expectations that weren't just spiritual, they were communal and emotional. If you publicly stepped outside the expectation of that group, you weren't just wrong, you disrupted the system. Sometimes you were removed from the system and expected to publicly repent in order to restore that relationship with the group. And when I tell some of the things from my childhood, sometimes people will say, well, that's crazy. Why would you ever do that? And I would tell them, that's the thing. When you're born into a system like that, it doesn't feel crazy. It feels normal. It feels moral. It actually feels necessary in that system. And I guess that's what makes the Patty problem so complicated. Because sometimes systems survive by adapting around dysfunction. And I'm not meaning like evil dysfunction. Sometimes it starts with actual compassion or love. People are genuinely trying to help someone or something that's fragile. Maybe there's emotional reactivity. There's struggling, there's overwhelmedness, whatever it is, but over time, everyone starts to adapt. Everyone accommodates. And eventually that dance just starts feeling normal. And I see it everywhere. I see it in organizations. I see it in leadership. I have told leaders often, be careful not to gaslight the people you're leading into believing the dysfunction that they are experiencing is normal. Because sometimes people notice something unhealthy in a system, but the response that they receive is, no. That's just what we do. That's just how committed people act. That's just part of our culture. And meanwhile, what's really happening is that people have adapted themselves around emotional dysfunction. And they've done it for so long that nobody remembers another way of functioning. Someone looks around and says, why am I dancing this dance? And they step off the stage. And once they stop participating, something really strange happens. The person who's getting off the stage is often now seen as the problem. Not because they're cruel, not because they stopped caring, but because the system had quietly organized itself around maintaining this emotional balance, around protecting certain expectations, around keeping certain roles alive. I've seen this in families, faith communities, friendships. Emotional scripts get handed to us all the time. Here's your role. This is what a good son does. This is what loyalty looks like. This is how we keep our family together. This is how we avoid upsetting others. So when you stop participating in those scripts, people don't experience that as healthy boundary setting. They don't go, oh, good for you. They experience it as betrayal. And that is the Patty problem. And honestly, I don't think there's a perfect answer to it. I still believe in kindness. I still believe in grace. I still believe in trying to understand people's pain, their humanity, and their fragility. I'm not interested in becoming cold or cynical just because expectations got messy. I also think there's a difference between being kind and surrendering yourself to every emotional expectation that's placed on you. And that's something I've had to learn later in life. I've seen it throughout my whole life. When you stop playing certain roles, there are people who will absolutely decide that you are now the villain in those stories. Not because you're harmful, but because the system no longer knows how to function the same way without your participation. The dance stopped. And that's hard, especially for people who genuinely care about humanity. I think that's why I keep coming back to that phrase I used in the earlier episodes about getting off the stage. Because getting off the stage sounds freeing in theory until you realize that people still performing will not clap for you on the way out. And in fact, they may boo. But I still think it's worth asking, how do we stay human? How do we stay loving? How do we recognize the complexity and how fragile people and organizations can be without losing ourselves inside those emotional systems that don't make sense anymore? So I don't have clean answers, but I do think part of it is learning how to stay kind without participating in all of those scripts that are handed to me. And maybe that's the Patty problem, not trying to figure out how to control everyone else's expectations, but learning really how to remain fully human while deciding which expectations we can't carry anymore. All right, so here's your nudge. How are you paying attention to the dances that you are automatically stepping into? The ones everyone around you calls normal. The ones where keeping the peace slowly becomes more important than telling the truth. And if you find yourself exhausted from carrying those expectations that no longer make sense, just quietly ask yourself, why am I still dancing this dance? And if you do step off the stage, try to do it with kindness, even if the others start to boo.
Another reel for the shelf.